Chair Russell, you are now live.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Northwest Community Council for the night of September 13th. I'm Paul Russell, and I'm the councillor for Lower Sackville. I'd like to call the meeting to order. It is 6:03 p.m. And as is usual with these virtual meetings, I'd like to run through some of the role and just make sure that everybody's audio and video are working correctly. So let's start with District 1 and Councillor Daigle-Gammon. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and colleagues and staff and members of the public that are here, all set for our meeting tonight.
Good stuff. Thank you. And Councillor Lovelace, District 13.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. Happy to be here. Hello, colleagues and staff. District 13 Councillor, Hammonds Plains St. Margaret's.
Super. Thank you. And Councillor Blackburn, District 14, I believe.
You are correct, sir. Hello, good evening, everybody from beautiful downtown Beaverbank.
Super. Thank you. Andrea from the clerk's office, good evening.
Good evening, Chair Russell.
Good evening. And Roxanne from our solicitor this evening. Hello.
Good evening, everyone.
Hello. And so we are still waiting on Deputy Mayor Outfit, but we can proceed with the agenda at this point. Let me see now. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of August 9th of 2021. Can I have a motion, please, to approve the minutes of August 9th, 2021?
So moved, Councillor Daigle-Gammon.
Thank you.
Second.
Do we have a second? Seconded by Councillor Blackburn. Thank you. Any errors or omissions? Okay, seeing none, all in favor of the minutes, please signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. All opposed, say nay. Great, thank you. The approval of the order of business and approval of additions and deletions over to the clerk. Do we have anything this evening?
Chair Russell, we do not have any additions or deletions from the clerk's office this evening.
Okay, thank you. Can I have a motion, please, then to approve the order of business as presented?
I so move. The order is presented.
Thank you.
Second, Councillor Lovelace.
Thank you, Councillor Lovelace. And members of council, do you have anything to add, delete, or suggest a change to?
The only thing I'll be changing is 13.2.1, but we can do that once we hit that agenda item, improvements to Lucasville Hammonds Plains intersection. I'll just be making the adjustment
Right.
to that motion, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Thank you very much for that, Councillor Lovelace. So all in favor of the order of business as presented, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Super. We have an agenda. Business arising out of the minutes. I don't believe there is any. Call for declaration of conflicts of interest. Okay, thank you. Motions of reconsideration is none. Motions of rescission is none. Consideration of deferred matters and notices of table matters is none. So we are on to our public hearings. And this evening, we have a public hearing about case 23495, and that starts with a staff presentation by Peter Nightingale, if I'm not mistaken.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. Give me a moment here. I'll share my presentation with you.
Super. Thank you very much.
So just let me know if that looks all right.
That looks great. We see slide 1.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So thank you and good evening, Mr. Chair and members of Community Council. As mentioned, my name is Peter Nightingale and I'm a planner with the Rural Policy and Planning Applications team. Here this evening with regards to public hearing for case 23495, which is the amendment to an existing development agreement for 3009 Highway 2 in Fall River, which is the Inn on the Lake property. All right, so this property is located on the shore of Lake Thomas in Fall River near the interchange between highways 102, 118, and Highway 2. And it's shown outlined in red here on these maps. The subject property currently contains a hotel and a restaurant use known as the Inn on the Lake, as well as several outdoor recreation areas on the property as shown here in the aerial photography. This property is subject to an existing development agreement, which was approved by Community Council in 2015. And the existing development agreement allows for the construction of an addition on the rear of the existing Inn on the Lake building. And it contains options for the redevelopment of this site to either retain the existing hotel use in the existing building and add 75 new residential units in the addition, or the entire property can be converted, including the existing building, which would result in elimination of the hotel use and a total of up to 91 residential units throughout the entire building. This agreement also allows for the addition of a dwelling unit into the detached garage on the property and just shy of 1,400 square feet of commercial space in the main building. The development agreement also contains several requirements for approvals that are required from provincial authorities, Nova Scotia Department of Environment and Climate Change, and Nova Scotia Department of Public Works, which was formerly known as Department of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal up until this week. These things are required before any permits can be issued in accordance with this agreement. The original application for redevelopment of this property was made in March of 2012, and a public information meeting was held in May 2012. Between 2012 and 2015, this proposal went through many iterations where the developer resubmitted the application several times to address issues that were raised by municipal staff, by external review agencies, concerns that were raised by the public. So it was quite an extensive review and revision process at the time of the original agreement. Ultimately, this proposal that exists on the property today, the existing DA, was approved after a public hearing held in May 2015. And the effective date of the development agreement was March 2016. So that's after the agreement was signed and registered with the province at the Land Registration Office. Throughout this extensive review process, there was review by internal HRM staff, as well as extensive external review from Halifax Waters Advisory Board, which today is the Halifax Regional Watershed Advisory Board, Nova Scotia Department of Environment, Department of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal, regarding some of the environmental implications and the traffic situations that were relevant for this application. The existing agreement on the property required construction of the redevelopment to commence no later than March 16th, 2021, which hasn't happened. And so prior to that expiry date of the agreement, the property owner made an application to amend the agreement to allow an additional 5 years for the commencement of construction date. And that would also push the completion date out 5 years from what's in the existing development agreement. No other changes to the approved development have been requested by the property owner. The only other thing we've put in there, we added a little housekeeping amendment to the agreement just in recognition of the fact that this is now serviced by municipal water. In 2015, it would have to rely on an on-site water distribution system, but now that municipal services are available, we wanted to make sure they had the opportunity to connect to that. Other than the time extension and the housekeeping amendment for water service, they've not requested any changes to this development. This property is in the Village Gateway Zone under the Planning District 14 and 17 land use bylaw, and it's within the River Lakes Village Center designation under the municipal planning strategy. As I mentioned, the existing use of the property is a hotel and a restaurant, and the enabling policy that allowed this development agreement for a new multiple unit dwelling was policy P68, which allows council to consider new multiple unit dwellings on lands served by existing private sewage treatment plants. Just going a little bit deeper into policy P68, in the Planning District 14 and 17 plan area, council can consider by development agreement new multiple unit dwellings in any designation in the plan area if the property is served by an existing private sewage treatment plant, which existed prior to 1989. Which was the adoption of the municipal planning strategy in this area. When considering such applications, council shall have regard for the means by which solid and liquid waste will be treated, provisions for the continuing maintenance of the proposed development, the architectural design and scale of any buildings and its compatibility with nearby land uses, provisions for landscaping, and the location, size, and number of access points and parking areas. So these are the main criteria that had to be satisfied in 2015 when Community Council approved the original agreement. So we're here this evening to discuss an amendment to this approved agreement. And when looking at an amendment to an existing DA, we're looking at the policy implications of the change that's being requested. So the existing agreement is already approved by council, and it's already been determined that the existing agreement is consistent with the planning policy. This application is for a time extension, and there are no proposed changes to the development itself. As there are no policies in the planning strategy that speak to the length of time that can be given to a development agreement, the request for time extension itself does not conflict with any policies in the NPS. However, we also look at external factors that may have changed since the initial approval was granted in 2015 and the request for time extension today. To make sure that nothing external to our policies or this development itself have changed that might impact whether what's proposed can still be considered to be in line with the planning policies or not. The main external factors that we looked at in reviewing this request for a time extension were the environmental implications of the development and the impact on traffic in the community. While the proposal has not changed, we wanted to make sure that there were no changes to environmental regulations that could affect how the development moves forward. And to satisfy this, we talked to Nova Scotia Environment and Climate Change staff, who confirmed that regardless of the outcome of this planning application, the property owner will have to comply with all regulations for the approval and operation of a sewage treatment plant. There's no grandfathering involved or anything like that with this being an older approval. When they come in for their permit to build something, Nova Scotia Environment is going to look at the regulations that exist today and make sure that they design and operate a system that meets the regulations that they have today. The second factor we looked at was the traffic. Have traffic conditions on Highway 2 changed significantly since the initial approval was granted in 2015? So on this side of things, we talked to our municipal engineering staff, and we also talked to the Nova Scotia Department of Public Works, again, formerly TIR, who told us that recent changes and planned upcoming changes to the road network and the infrastructure in this area are designed to improve the existing traffic that's in this area. So for example, the Aerotech connector is a big piece that the province is planning right now, which will be a connection from Highway 2 out to Highway 102 at the Aerotech exit, which is designed to divert a lot of traffic that's currently going through Highway 2 in this area over to the 102. So given that feedback we got from those external review agencies whose mandate is looking at the environment and looking at traffic situation, they told us that the existing traffic impact statement that was done in 2015, the findings of that study are still valid, that any changes that are coming to the transportation network will improve the traffic situation here compared to what it was in 2015. So they told us that we were in a good spot, and they had no objections to the time extension and didn't feel that the time extension would result in any issues for environmental or traffic safety concerns. For this application, we engaged with the public by doing a mail out to property owners all the way around Lake Thomas. Typically with a rural planning application, we'll start by putting a buffer of about 500 feet around the subject property, and then looking at where that lands in the map and deciding if we need to pull in certain properties and kind of apply a common sense approach to make sure we're contacting everybody we need to. With this application, we were cognizant of the fact that this is on Lake Thomas, and it's not just going to impact the properties that are immediately adjacent to this, but it could impact properties all around Lake Thomas. And so we used the same notification area that was used in 2015, which encompassed all of the properties all the way around Lake Thomas. And the map showing that is at the back of the staff report, but we captured 267 properties around Lake Thomas. We sent them a mail out notifying of this request for time extension and inviting them to provide feedback on that to us. As a result of that, we received communication from 9 separate individuals, phone calls and emails, Some of those who contacted us were speaking on behalf of a property owners association or a group of neighbors or a nonprofit group or what have you, but we spoke to 9 individuals about this application and got feedback from them. In total, the website that we posted online for this application received 136 unique visitors, and that was at the time when the staff report was prepared this summer. The feedback that we heard from the public about this proposal generally fell into 4 categories. That was the water quality of Lake Thomas, traffic impacts on Highway 2, impacts of construction activity on adjacent properties, and concern that the development is out of scale with the surrounding community. So of those concerns, I just want to hone in on the ones that relate to those external factors that I talked about. So the things that we looked at that may have changed since 2015 that could affect whether this proposed redevelopment is still in line with policy or not. And the big one we heard a lot about was the sewage treatment plant. So the existing Inn on the Lake property is served by an on-site sewage treatment plant that discharges into Lake Thomas. And as mentioned, this was in existence prior to 1989. So it's quite an old plant. It's been there for quite some time. And the proposed redevelopment would continue to be served by an on-site sewage treatment plant. It would have to be a new sewage treatment plant that was designed to accommodate the growth. That sewage treatment plant that's built will have to comply with the latest and greatest Nova Scotia environment regulations that we have today. And again, that's a condition that would have to be met before they can get a permit to break ground on anything here. As a sewage treatment plant is a much different technology than a typical on-site septic system that we usually see in a rural area. A sewage treatment plant must have a qualified operator, and Nova Scotia Environment and Climate Change has requirements for regular reporting. So that qualified operator has to make sure that the system is functioning the way it was designed and approved by Nova Scotia Environment, and they have to do regular reports to Nova Scotia Environment and Climate Change to make sure that the outflow from that plant is within acceptable parameters and operating within what Nova Scotia Environment allows for that type of system. We also heard feedback about the impact that the actual construction activity was going to have on the lake and on the environment. Again, protection of the environment itself does fall under Nova Scotia Environment's jurisdiction, but nevertheless, there are many safeguards that are built into the development agreement that requires them to demonstrate and do things above and beyond what Nova Scotia Environment would require. So before they can get a permit for construction, they have to give us a stormwater management plan and an erosion and sedimentation control plan that meets Nova Scotia Environment's guidelines for construction sites. And those plans have to be approved by our municipal engineering group before they can sign off on a building permit here. There's continuing monitoring of those throughout the construction process. So we approve the plan for what the acceptable mitigation tools and protection factors are in relation to the construction. And then our engineering team monitors those to make sure they stay in place, that they're operating the way that they're supposed to. And we can require the property owner and the developer to make changes to that if for whatever reason there are additional safeguards required or changes necessary. Finally, we heard concerns about additional motorized craft on the lake as a result of this development. Excuse me. With new residential units going in here, there was concern that the people living in this building are going to have motorboats and jet skis and whatnot, and they'll be using the lake and resulting in an increase of traffic on the lake, gas-powered crafts that could affect the environment or could affect the reasonable enjoyment of property owners around the lake. So the municipality does not regulate recreational use of lakes. Our jurisdiction ends at the high water mark. The federal government regulates whether or not you're allowed to have motorized craft on a lake. And there is a process through which the province can request that the federal government add lakes to that list of where those restrictions are. To my knowledge, there's only about 2 or 3 lakes in Nova Scotia that prohibit motorized crafts under this special exemption. So it's not typical, but it does fall outside our municipal authority for what we can do in a land use bylaw, in a development agreement. We can regulate the things that they build on the land, not how they use the lake. And the other big ticket item that we heard a lot about was traffic. So Highway 2 in this area is owned by HRM, but due to its proximity to the highway interchange, it's also under the control of Nova Scotia Department of Public Works. So any new accesses or any changes to access or any upgrades to Highway 2 must be approved by both HRM and the province. Prior to the approval of the existing development agreement, it was determined that a left turn lane from Highway 2 onto this property was going to be required to prevent traffic queuing for this development from backing up onto Highway 2 and causing traffic issues in the roundabout and blocking traffic in that way. So again, this is a requirement before permits are issued, and the design and the construction of this left turn lane must meet the department's requirements at the time when they come in to apply for this. So again, there's no grandfathering of this. They must come up with a design for a left turn lane that all the departments can approve before coming in for, before getting any construction permits to develop here. And finally, I just wanted to kind of demonstrate visually where this development agreement fits into the process as a whole. Essentially, council isn't really being asked to approve or refuse this development tonight. They're being asked to approve or refuse the rules under which this developer can redevelop this site. And if they can't meet those rules that are in the development agreement, they don't get a permit to build it. So as part of the development agreement process, we've gone through our internal review and our external reviews, and we've done our public information and consultation. And we're here this evening with the public hearing for this application, after which council will either approve or refuse this request. The decision of council can be appealed to the Utility and Review Board, either by the applicant or by an affected member of the public, if they feel that council's decision was not reasonably consistent with policy. If all of those things happen and we end up at the end of the day with an approved agreement that's signed by the city and the property owner, and that's registered, then that one piece of the process is done. But they still aren't getting permits to build anything until they can get approval from Nova Scotia Department of Environment and Climate Change for their sewage treatment plant. If Department of Environment won't approve that plant, or if they will only approve a smaller plant than what is needed for this development, then the property owner will have to revisit this, and it may result in a reduction in what they can do here. Similarly, the upgrades that are required to Highway 2, they must receive that approval from the Provincial Department of Public Works and our engineering team for the scale of development that they want to do here. And that must be done before they can come in for a permit application. Only once all those sort of parallel processes are done, it comes together to the point where they can ask for a building permit. And once the building permit is issued, then we continue to have our ongoing monitoring that we have for construction projects. Our building officials are out regularly doing inspections, making sure everything is done properly. Our engineering technicians are out there regularly, making sure they're complying with their construction management plans, and environmental controls are in place, and sedimentation and erosion, things like that are working the way that they're supposed to. And even once the building is done, the construction's finished, they have their occupancy permit, the property continues to be bound by this development agreement. So if going forward for the rest of the lifespan of this building, they will have to meet the maintenance requirements of the development agreement. They'll have to continue to meet Department of Environment's requirements for monitoring and reporting on the sewage treatment plant. That will go on forever. And so if other issues come up after the fact that puts them out of compliance with this development agreement, we still have a tool to go back and make sure that they're in line with what's been approved and what they've been allowed to do. So based on that, staff are recommending that Northwest Community Council approve the proposed amending development agreement, which shall be substantially of the same form as set out in attachment A, and require the amending development agreement to be signed by the property owner within 240 days, or an extension thereof granted by council on request of the property owner from the date of the final approval of council, and any other bodies as necessary, including applicable appeal periods, whichever is later. Otherwise, this approval will be void, and obligations arising hereunder shall be at an end. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair and councilors, for your time. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have on that presentation.
Thank you very much, Peter. Before we go to questions, I would like to, I had omitted this from the beginning. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us this evening for the public hearing. The order of events for this virtual hearing will be the same as a regular public hearing, in that we would start with a staff presentation with questions of clarification afterwards, then give the applicant an opportunity to present via Zoom, and then go to the public hearing speakers list. As a reminder to all speakers and those watching from home, in order to have signed up as a speaker, the deadline was 4:30 p.m. on the business day prior to the hearing, which was Friday, September 10th. And there is one speaker registered for this public hearing. So at this point, I'd like to open the floor to any questions. Please indicate that you would like to ask any questions in the chat. And go ahead, Councillor Daigle-Gammon, the floor is yours.
Excuse me, Chair Russell, before
Yes.
Councillor Daigle-Gammon continues, I just wanted to also have you ask whether or not we've received any correspondence.
My apologies, I missed that step as well. Thank you very much to the clerk's office. Have we received any correspondence?
Yes, we have received correspondence, and it has been circulated to the members of the Northwest Community Council.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Councillor Daigle-Gammon.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Peter, for a really succinct presentation. I appreciate it. And so I understand that we're not saying yes or no to this development agreement, but just to whether or not the extension is there. And that's when we're considering the policy considerations, it's like the external factors, anything that would have changed, right? Okay, so my questions might be a little bit, I hope I'm going to stay in that right path, Peter, that I'm supposed to, but I'm sure you're going to tell me if I don't. So, but so one of the things, the question really around the sewage treatment plant would be the qualified operator that would be have to be part of this. Would that be somebody that would be like full-time that would have to be on staff, or would it be a contract? I guess I'm wondering about the assurance that that monitoring is done all the time. And then the other thing is around any environmental changes. So the fact around the blue-green algae that has been prevalent through all of our lakes and just the lake ecosystems, I'm wondering how we're making sure that our lakes are protected around any kinds of developments, that kind of thing. And who monitors for this? Where the lake is provincial and this development agreement is around municipal, it feels like, you know, we're handing this off to the province, but are we assured that the province has the capacity and the means that they're going to be ensuring that our lakes are okay? And around the lake usage potentially being up in this development agreement, is there a boat launch? Is there a docking area that people would be using it? And I'm just wondering if that's something that will just increase the usage on the lake. And then when we say that if they don't get the permit approvals from either Nova Scotia Environment and Climate Change or Transportation and our municipal engineers, if there's a change in the scale of the project, does that mean that they have to come back for a public hearing again? Does that change anything, or does it just in that permitting process, it moves forward from there? I may come back with a few more questions, but that's where I'm at for now. I do know that the community is very, very concerned around the traffic and the impacts of the left-handing turn and all of that kind of stuff. So the lake systems being protected, the sewage and the transportation are huge issues. So thank you, Peter.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, to the councilor's questions, I'll try to go through these one at a time, and you just let me know if I've missed anything. So with regards to the operator of the sewage treatment plant, a qualified operator of a sewage treatment plant is someone who is licensed and certified by Nova Scotia Environment to do that. It can be someone who's on staff who does that of the property owner. It could also be something that they contract out. I'm not aware that Nova Scotia Environment particularly has any concern for what that relationship is between the property owner and the operator, as long as they are licensed properly under Nova Scotia Environment to do that work, and that they're doing it in accordance with the regulations, and that the monitoring and reporting that they're doing meets their requirements. As for the monitoring of the environmental implications, essentially, how are we making sure the lakes are protected? So admittedly, there's a little bit of handholding that needs to happen here between us and the province. So Nova Scotia Environment has laws in place that say you can't, discharge things into a lake, improperly, you can't contaminate water bodies, things like that. And if there is a violation of that, then Nova Scotia Environment would have the authority to lay charges or do whatever may be the case. But obviously, we don't want to get to the point where something bad has already happened and Nova Scotia Environment is going in and investigating and laying charges or whatever they're going to do. We want to make sure that that never happens in the first place. So what we do as a municipality on the land side of things is we make sure that they have protections in place on the land to stop those contaminants from getting to the lake. So that's where our role is. And that's why we have these requirements for sedimentation and erosion control plans. So they have to make sure they have, silt screening or whatever means the engineer decides is necessary to stop runoff from going into the lake, that they're capturing those things on site. They have to have a stormwater management plan because we know that stormwater flow into our lakes is a major contributor of phosphorus and whatnot into water bodies. And so our engineering team has specific requirements for balancing pre and post stormwater flows. So in other words, they can't, at the end of the day or during construction, they can't discharge more stormwater into the lake than they were doing before. Essentially, they can't make anything worse than what they have today. Sorry, just reading back in my notes to make sure I'm capturing everything you had asked there. I think that covers the lake monitoring piece, but you can let me know if I missed anything there. We are certainly aware that this chain of lakes in particular is under intense pressure. We know there have been issues this summer with blue-green algae, and that's going forward, and our engineering team knows that too. And so when they're reviewing things like these environmental protection plans that the developer is required to prepare and submit with their permit application, they know what the added risks for these sites are, and they're making sure that those measures that are designed and approved are doing the things they need to do to stop that discharge from entering the lake. As for the usage of the lake, the boat launch or dock, those are not something that are shown on the site plan for this development. Now, the development agreement does allow for accessory buildings in accordance with the land use bylaw. So even though they haven't been shown on the plan, and that's not something that they've come forward and saying this is what we're proposing, they would be allowed to do that as long as they're meeting the requirements of the watercourse buffer. And that's a little bit challenging because they already have quite a few structures in the watercourse buffer. So I'm not sure they could get any new accessory buildings in the buffer, just because we only allow up to 20 square meters of buildings in the buffer, and they're past that. A dock is a little bit different because our responsibility and our authority stops at the high water mark. So a dock is it's in the lake. And so that would fall under provincial regulations. They would approve a dock in this area. We would approve the land connection to the dock, if you will. So the path or the walkway or what have you. And the watercourse buffer regulations do allow for things like walkways and driveways and paths in the watercourse buffer. So potentially they could certainly have a boat launch or a dock or something in the buffer that would fall within what they're allowed to do here. And finally, about changes to the development if they don't get the approval from Nova Scotia Environment for the intensity of a plant that they need to serve this type of development. So the development agreement in this property has some allowances for minor changes. So there's a percentage that they can change the footprint of the building. They can make it a little bit smaller. They can reduce the number of units a little bit, things like that, up to a point. But once they get past that point, then they would be coming in for an amendment to the development agreement. And if you just bear with me, I can tell you kind of what those thresholds are. Powers of the development officer. So they can increase the building footprint by up to 5%, provided that they're meeting their watercourse buffer, their setbacks, all those sorts of things. And they can decrease the footprint of the building by up to 20%. Again, as long as they're meeting all those requirements for setbacks and watercourse buffers and whatnot. They can also make changes within the building without having to come back for an amendment. So if, for example, they had to reduce the number of units that would result in changing their floor plans, that's allowed under the agreement. But it's really about changes to the outside of the building that fall within that 5 to 20% threshold. That's when If they need to reduce it beyond that, they'd be in for a new amendment. And I think I've covered your points, and please let me know if I've missed anything.
Yep, I'll let my colleagues ask questions and then I might come back for a second time around if that's all right, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely. Yep. Okay.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. Councillor Outfit, Deputy Mayor.
Hi, Mr. Chair, and first of all, my apologies. I went off to do some errands and said I had till 7 o'clock before this meeting, and because we always used to meet at 7, we changed it to 6, and so my apologies. Just very quickly to check in with the clerk and with the solicitor, because I missed part of the presentation. Do I have to recuse myself from voting? I believe I do, but I just wanted to confirm.
Yes, Deputy Mayor Outfit, you won't be able to vote, but you will be able to ask questions of clarification and engage in the debate if you wish.
All right, thanks very much. My apologies.
And your audio is breaking up, so I would advise you to turn off your video, please. Thank you.
And you are still muted, Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, no, I'm all through. Thanks very much, Chair, and I'll be listening in.
Okay. Thank you very much. Councillor Lovelace.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Peter, for this very concise and just well-delivered presentation. I really appreciate it. In your presentation, you discussed the fact that HRM does not have any authority over recreational use of lakes. And so I just wanted a clarification around Ordinance 158. Is that an ordinance that no longer has any relevance, or is it something that, it's just no longer has any authority? Ordinance 158 is respecting the use of lakes. So I'm just a little confused if we do have authority over some lakes, or is Ordinance 58 something that's passed because it is so old? So I just was looking for a clarification of that. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm not, through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, I am not intimately aware of the content of Ordinance 158. I do see it was an old City of Halifax ordinance that was passed in the 1970s. I wonder if I might defer to our solicitor. I think we have Roxanne McLaurin here who might be able to speak more to whether that's still something that's on the books or how that might affect this.
Hi, that's that's not something I can answer off the top of my head. I'm just calling it up on the website now. I haven't had an opportunity to review it. I can take a look at it.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that. I just wanted to make sure that we are clear in our communications if we do have any kind of authority over lakes, or if we actually don't. I do recognize that this is a very busy lake, and that there is concern in the community about adding boat traffic and obviously environmental concerns and so on with the use of the water. But actually, Councillor Daigle Gammon asked my question about kind of the scaling down of the agreement. So I'm good for now. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you very much. And Councillor Daigle Gammon, do you have anything further?
Oh, good. We're back at me already. Okay.
We're back at you already. Yes.
Okay, good. Well, I guess the only other question that I might have left is, I guess people are wondering why it didn't begin. So the rationale for why the development didn't start, and for the extension being 5 years, I'm not sure if the applicant were allowed to ask that of the applicant or not. I know that there have been some development agreements that there has been extensions due to COVID, a COVID-related reason. So I think we were just curious about why the delay.
Right. So at this point, the public hearing has not started yet, so the applicant would not be allowed to respond yet. But Peter, if you would like to respond to that question, please do.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to the councillor. This is a question that came out quite a bit from the public, and so we did put it to the developer. Generally, the feedback we got was there were just general delays in the construction industry and delays with COVID, and I'm sure at the public hearing, when they have a chance to speak, they might be able to provide a little more information on that. But from our perspective, the planning policies in the MPS don't set out what the time frame should be for an agreement. So in terms of why they need the extension or why 5 years was chosen as the number, essentially they asked for an additional 5 years, and there's no policy that says it can be less than that. From a staff perspective, when we're deciding on what sort of the sunset clause, if you will, should be in agreements or how long extensions should be granted for, we look at kind of, are there changes happening in the community, or are there planned or proposed changes to the planning documents that might come on in the next few years? If we were aware, for example, that there were going to be major changes to the municipal planning strategy in the next 2 years, we might be hesitant to grant a 5-year time extension. At this time, there are no planned, municipal plan reviews or anything like that in this area that would affect the policies around the books. So we felt comfortable recommending 5 years as an appropriate time extension. And I guess that's kind of what I can say about it from staff's perspective.
Great, that's what I was wondering, if 5 years is, how you come up with 5 years, and if there'd be anything that would come up that would inhibit the ability to continue to build. So I appreciate the clarity. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have addressed all questions of staff from the Community Council. At this point, I'd like to open the public hearing, and I would invite the applicant to address the Community Council if you would like. You are allowed 10 minutes to make any presentation that you have. Now, I have heard that you don't have a formal presentation ready, but also that you are available to answer questions. So Ron Nelson, I just want to make sure, are you with us this evening? I see you there, but you're on mute.
Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you now, yes.
Okay. What question would you like me to answer first?
So at this point, thank you for just confirming that you're here. I would like to reach out to the Community Council and see if you have any questions of the applicant. And please indicate that by typing in the chat. And I don't see any questions right off. As I understand it, there were a couple of options. One of them was for continuing with a portion of, Councillor Blackburn, I'm going to hand the floor to you.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. No, I just had a quick question about the applicant's plans for the area, though not indicated. Do they have plans for a public boat launch of any kind? And maybe some clarification as well on the reason that they're applying for the 5-year extension. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Blackburn. Go ahead, Mr. Nelson.
We have no specific plans for a boat launch, but I do note that the two properties across from Shoppers Drug Mart, which the municipality acquired, has now put a boat launch in for power boats. I also note that the Wobbe property next to me has a boat's moored off, the power boat's moored off it. So, by the way, I've never been in favor of motorboats on Lake Thomas. The last thing I need is ski-doos doing wheelies in front of my gazebo in the middle of a wedding. So I frankly would welcome restriction on the use of motor vehicles on the lake. With regards to the request for a 5-year extension, we have several delays. I'll give you 3. With the center plan, most of the developers, financing organizations, and contractors have been distracted looking at projects within the downtown core. Secondly, while we were in a maybe we're going to get it, maybe we're not going to get it, central water phase from 2017 to late 2018, no investment partner was going to move forward on that until that was resolved. And by the time that got resolved, we were into COVID, which basically stopped everything.
All right. No, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Once again, I don't see anybody else who has typed into the chat. So I'm just wondering, one of the options that I saw in the report was for the hotel to continue as a hotel, and one of them was for the hotel to continue, but not as a hotel. It would be converted to residential units. I'm wondering if there is a preference or a design, or do you know which of those two paths you would be proceeding on? My concern, as someone from the neighboring community, is that if it turns into a strictly residential unit property, that we would then have no hotel in this area from Kearney Lake to the airport to somewhere in Burnside or beyond. And a significant concern from my perspective, but please, Mr. Nelson.
Okay, some of the, as you can imagine, we're looking for investment partners in this transaction. Some of which are quite interested in maintaining the hotel, see it as a real asset. They tend to be European investors where that kind of format is quite acceptable. When we talk about to local developers, they're not interested in having any ownership of a hotel. They would be interested in possibly leasing such a thing out. So it depends on who the investment partner will be and what they bring to the table.
I see.
Sorry, I can't be more specific, but that's the reality.
Oh, that's fair. That answers the question perfectly. Thank you very much for that clarification. Again, I don't see any further requests for questions in the chat. So I would like to move along to members of the public, and any member of the public who registered with the clerk's office on this matter will be given 5 minutes to address the topic. When I call your name, you may unmute your mic and begin speaking. Each speaker is asked to begin by stating your name and the name of the community in which you reside for the record. Please keep your comments respectful, on topic, and directed to me, the chair. Once you've finished your comments and answering any questions of clarification, please leave the Zoom meeting and watch the rest of the meeting using the webcast. The link is available at or on the halifax.ca page agenda for this meeting. The one registered speaker for the meeting this evening is Stephanie Appleby-Jones. And Stephanie, I see you there. You are on mute. Are you there? There we are.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now. Go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
Hello, Mr. Chair and Council. It's an exciting time in Nova Scotia and HRM. Because of our success in controlling the spread of COVID-19, people want to move here. We're experiencing exponential growth of buildings and newcomers to the area. We are fortunate to be able to make decisions as we develop and grow that will either make this a great place to live, or we will make decisions that we regret as they affect the health of residents, how we can live in our communities, and how those decisions will affect the environment around us. So the timing of this meeting is ironic. For the first time in my 25 years of living on Lake Thomas, blue-green algae was found in the lake. It was shut down for recreational use, and we were advised not to drink, shower, or use the water for our gardens. Since September 1st, 6 lakes on the Shubenacadie Canal are under a blue-green algae bloom advisory. These include Grand Lake, Fletcher's Lake, Lake Thomas, Lake William, Lake Charles, and Lake Micmac. Please consider this a wake-up call. Climate change is causing warmer temperatures that threaten the health of the lake system. Along with warm temperatures, blue-green algae blooms are caused by increased carbon in the atmosphere. And this comes from burning fossil fuels and, of course, increased vehicle traffic. Toxic blooms are also caused by phosphorus runoff into the lake system and nitrogen runoff from fertilizers and other sources. It is well known that increased human activity in and around a lake will accelerate eutrophication that cause the dense growth of plants and algae which die off, causing death of animal life in a body of water due to lack of oxygen. So I'm concerned as to how this development will affect Lake Thomas. I feel that the proposal for construction at the end on the lake is vague. They have said it could be 75 units with hotel or commercial units or 91 condo units. This must be determined before City Council gives permission for this to go forth. Both of these will increase traffic and carbon emissions in already traffic-stressed area. I'm curious to know if anyone has considered if all 91 units allowed will be allowed to put a motorboat on Lake Thomas, and you guys have already spoke about that. It definitely is not a very large lake and certainly cannot support that number of boats. The proposal states that a 20 by 20 area in the riparian zone of the lake will be encroached upon for parking. That encroached area means that the cars will be even closer to the lake edge, and I'm not really sure why that's acceptable in the original proposal. There's also a detail in the proposal that states that there will be more impervious surface than what is allowed. We know that impervious surfaces increase urban temperatures and runoff from developments. Equally important to the health of the lake is the health and well-being of the community's residents. There was an article in the Chronicle Herald last week titled "How Halifax Goes Easy on Developers Who Break the Rules," which is concerning. I'm worried that major construction at this site will not be monitored appropriately. I don't like the ask for forgiveness attitude that we are seeing as developments grow in HRM. This is where developers cut trees, cause pollution, for example, blasting rock that could contaminate an area, and show no regard for residents around construction projects. Fines seem to be minimal for developers who ignore safety and environmental bylaws during construction. The developer has used the past land use bylaws to get permission to build 6 stories on Lake Thomas. The existing building is non-conforming with land use bylaw requirements that were adopted by HRM after construction of the existing building. I believe that this is a weakness in policy, and new policies should be developed to prevent this from happening. This 6-story building will be like no other in Fall River. Myself and the residents of our subdivision are requesting that the developer have to reapply for this development. The mandatory time has passed for construction to begin. The developer should have to clearly define what he plans to build there. He should not be allowed to encroach on the riparian zone, nor should he be allowed to build up to 6 stories. Sorry, I have one more page. I have submitted the names of residents who live on the lake in a document addressed to council. We are asking that the developer reapply since almost 6 years have passed with no construction taking place. In the proposal, it is stated that there are no homeowners nearby that would be affected. This is untrue. We and many others will be directly affected through noise, pollution, declining lake health, and increased traffic of the proposed development. I'm asking that the council consider making new policies that stop developers from sneaking in proposals on existing buildings that are already non-conforming with current land use bylaws. This would protect homeowners from having to go through what our community is going through now.
Stephanie, you're at 30 seconds.
I hope that HRM and its council will choose environmentally sound development that respects citizens of our community and protects Lake Thomas and the Shubenacadie Lake system from further damage. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Stephanie, for your presentation. I would like to ask if any of the committee have any questions for Stephanie. Okay. Go ahead, Councillor Daigle-Gammon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have to be quicker getting typing into that chat line, I think. Stephanie, thank you very much for sending the information to us and to the clerk's office to make sure that we had it in for your presentation. I really appreciate it. One of the things, or some of the things that are in here, you know, we've talked a little bit about tonight through with either the HRM planner. But when you say that, I guess just to be clear, the proposal was already approved, and you say that it was the outdated land use bylaws. Can you reference that for me?
Yes, in the proposal, it's stated that the building is already breaking some land use bylaws because it was built before those bylaws were made. So,
Okay.
right, so that has already been approved, but my concern is that there are other allowances that have been made, and that is the 20 by 20 encroachment on the riparian zone, and also the fact that they have more impervious surfaces than is actually allowed. And that's not necessarily to do with that land use bylaw, the old one. But
Okay.
does
Thank
that
you.
make sense?
It does. Mr. Chair, are we allowed to ask Peter Nightingale to respond to that?
We are,
I know in the public hearing, there are certain rules, but
we can ask Peter to respond to that after the public hearing closes.
okay.
Peter, would you be interested in responding to that at this point?
Mr. Chair, I certainly can respond to some of those points. I don't know if you'd prefer me to do that now or after the public hearing. It's whatever council's direction.
I want to make sure that I'm not violating any of the rules. So
Yeah.
Roxanne or Andrea, feel free to speak up if I am. But in the absence of that, please proceed, Peter.
Thank you.
I see Roxanne is unmuted.
Yes, sorry. I was clicking on the wrong spot. Usually staff is given an opportunity to respond to the speakers at the close of the public hearing, but I believe we only have one speaker, so I see no lack in procedural fairness, and Peter wants to respond now.
Okay, thank you, Roxanne. Go ahead, Peter.
Certainly. Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councilor's questions about the speaker's points. There are a few things there I can provide some additional information and some clarity on. So there were a couple of points that were raised that came from the original staff report from 2015, and I can provide a little bit more information on that. So the question about the 20 by 20 encroachment in the buffer for the driveway access. So the watercourse buffer regulations that we have now restrict development within 20 meters of the ordinary high water mark, but there are certain exemptions in the land use bylaw that certain things are allowed in the buffer, regardless of their area. And a driveway is one of those things. So although you're not allowed to have development in the buffer, a driveway is something that's just permitted in the watercourse buffer. That's in the bylaw. So whether we go through a development agreement process or it's an as of right process, whatever it may be, that's just permitted activity. The other comment that came from the earlier staff report about no nearby homeowners being affected, I had a look at the old staff report to see what was said there, and it was specifically saying that there were no residential properties abutting this. So we certainly recognize that there are many residential properties around here and around the lake that are impacted by this development. And I think the point that original staff report was trying to make was just that none of the properties that are sharing a property line, nothing that's touching was residentially zoned. So whether that's relevant to, council's consideration or not, I just wanted to clarify where that kind of line came from. Around the nonconformity of the use and whatnot. So maybe if I could just take a minute to kind of go over the hierarchy of planning legislation and how this all kind of works together. So the HRM charter sets out the rules for what the municipality is allowed to do through a land use bylaw, what we're allowed to do through a development agreement. And it also sets out certain protections for property owners that we can't really touch. And one of those things is illegal nonconforming use or illegal nonconforming structure. So essentially, if a building existed or a use existed before the adoption of the land use bylaw, that is considered a legally nonconforming structure, and it's allowed to continue to exist as it does. It can even expand as long as they're essentially not making the nonconformity any worse. So the building that is on the site today, although it doesn't conform with the land use bylaw, it is a 100% legally authorized building. The Halifax Charter gives it protection to continue to exist as it does and whatnot. And then, so getting a little bit more into the addition and how that's considered. So there's a couple of different ways that we regulate development. So one of those ways is through a land use bylaw, and that's kind of viewed as the appropriate rules to apply to fairly straightforward development. So something like a single family dwelling, we can all agree that there are certain rules that should apply to all single family dwellings, and it should be a fairly straightforward process to get a permit for that. You meet your setbacks, you meet your lot coverage, things like that. You get a permit, doesn't need to come to council. For more intense development, that it would be very impractical to try to set out such specific rules when you're adopting a land use bylaw. The other tool we use for those types of uses is a development agreement. So it's not that this type of development is not allowed. It's just that the tool that allows it is more intensive than something for a more low impact development. And that's by design to make sure that there's more oversight and more opportunity to look at specific site conditions and specific requirements for these uses that we know are going to have higher impact and that the public should have an opportunity to have a say on, and that council should ultimately get to make the decision. So again, just to clarify sort of the different paths that we have to approving something, because this is a high impact use, it is allowed, the policy allows this type of activity. It just requires to go through this more rigorous process. I can also speak a little bit to the number of stories, and I know this was something that was in some of the correspondence as well, that there was a planning exercise that happened in the last 10 years that set out what the rules should be for the Fall River area. And this is the River Lake Secondary Planning Strategy. So within the River Lake Secondary Planning Strategy, and this is the area, I mean, essentially surrounding sort of the Shubenacadie system of lakes and surrounding communities, Fall River and Windsor Junction and Lake Fletcher and places like that. There were very specific rules that were adopted for those communities, and they did place restrictions on the number of stories. But again, kind of going back to the hierarchy of how these documents work, the River Lake Secondary Planning Strategy is an area-specific document, but the Planning District 14 and 17 Municipal Planning Strategy sits over top of that. So it contains sort of the very broad policy statements that apply to all of these communities. And then under that, we have sort of a subset of specific rules that apply to these communities. And I apologize if I'm getting too far into the planning jargon here with some of this, but essentially the point I'm trying to make is, even though the River Lake Secondary Planning Strategy has some really specific rules, it does not take away anything that's permitted or enabled through these overarching policies that apply to the whole plan area. And one of those policies is policy P68 that we're talking about tonight, that allows multi-unit dwellings on properties that are served by existing sewage treatment plants. So that's why it seems like there's this conflict between the planning process that we went through for this community, and I think it was around 2015 or 2014, it was somewhere in that timeline, and this overarching policy. It's because essentially it's a different set of rules and a different path that's being followed to get permission to do this type of building. So that's kind of where that sort of seeming discrepancy comes from. Just looking at my notes here, there were also some comments about more impervious surfaces than are currently allowed. This comes, I think, what was kind of being gotten at here was within the watercourse buffer. The watercourse buffer regulations came in with the first regional plan in 2006. And essentially that was designed to protect the vegetation that we have near watercourses, to protect the environment, to protect the watercourses, and try to limit the impact that development has on our natural environment. And so there are limits on the amount of impervious surface and the amount of structures and whatnot that you can have in that area and the amount of vegetation you can clear. But again, this property and the uses they have on the shoreline and near the lake, those existed before 2006. So those things were already in existence, and that kind of falls under that non-conforming criteria that we have in the charter that says, because these things were here before we regulated them, they're allowed to continue to be there. And we certainly wouldn't allow any additional clearing of vegetation related to this development. We wouldn't allow any, additional structures or anything like that, except for the specific exemptions that exist, like driveways, for example. So hopefully that maybe provides a few more details and sort of some of the reasoning behind why we get to where we are with this development.
Thank you, Peter. Mr. Chair, would you indulge me one more question?
Yes.
Thank you so much. Peter, if 5 years happens and this doesn't start, are they back to square one again?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councilor's question, this is kind of a bit of a unique situation, because normally a time extension is a non-substantive amendment in a development agreement. And basically what that means is if the developer asks for a time extension at least 60 days before the development agreement expires, there is no public hearing. It just goes to council, and by resolution of council, council decides whether to grant a time extension or not.
Okay.
In this case, the developer didn't fall within that 60 days. So that's why we had to consider this a substantive amendment, which means we're back for a whole new public hearing, which we normally wouldn't have for a time extension. So if the 5 years comes and goes a second time, the developer would have the option, if they apply more than 60 days before the agreement expires, they could apply for a time extension, which would just be a resolution of council. If their date comes and goes and they haven't applied for anything, whether it's substantive or non-substantive, then the development agreement is null and void, and they would have to reapply for a new development.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Stephanie, I see your hand there, but you have made your presentation and I haven't heard any questions of clarification for you. So I'm sorry, but I'm not going to be allowing you to speak at this point. And I don't see any further questions from any of the councillors. So at this point, I would like to give the applicant, Ron Nelson, if you would like to address any of the points that have been raised, then you have 5 minutes to do so.
Thank you. The lake is our most important asset, so we are, of course, very interested in seeing that it's healthy and maintained to be healthy. See everything done possible to make that happen, not only by ourselves, but by others. The lake is in the commercial zoning for Fall River. There are a number of other properties within that zone that are about to undergo massive development. Mickey McDonald just bought the property next to Turtleback. He plans to put condos in there and a small mall. Long Guy's property is for sale commercially. Laurie Baker's property is for sale commercially. I think you'll expect to see a number of properties along that stretch being developed. So unfortunately, that's the reality of development within the community that will be disruptive. We, of course, will make every effort with this project to minimize the disruption and do it as quickly as possible. With regards to my delay in making the application, I had talked to, I can here get my notes out. I had talked to Andrew Bone some time ago about making an application for a development agreement. He talked to Tia Langell, his boss, advised me to wait until March of this year. Unfortunately, in the interim, COVID hit, and like all hospitality operators, I got distracted trying to survive and missed the date. And when I realized that I made the application. So yes, I missed the 60-day application window, but we did make it before the development agreement expired. Okay. Peter's answered most of the questions that I could address. If there's any outstanding issue, I'd be happy to address them.
I don't believe there are any further questions. I also don't believe there is any opportunity for further questions of clarification to be asked. So thank you very much.
In closing, I would like to, number one, thank the council for hearing me out. I do appreciate the feedback from the community, and we're going to make every effort to address those concerns. It's interesting that the 267 area residents that were canvassed, only 1.9% had negative perspective on the project. So I hope the council will see fit to approve the extension so we can get on with this exciting project. There's a strong demand for the units. When we first announced the project back, or the development agreement back in 2015, we had over 100 people apply to be on the waiting list for the project. So there's a number of existing residents in Fall River that would like to downsize and move into them. There's a number of people who have moved out who want to move back. And there's a number of new people that want to move in. So there certainly is a desire for this type of project in Fall River. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ron, for your presentation and any clarification that you have provided. At this point, I would appreciate a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Councillor Daigle Gammon and seconded by
Second.
Councillor Blackburn. Thank you very much. All in favor of closing the public hearing?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Great. Thank you very much. And at this point, I would like to provide an opportunity for staff to address any further comments from the public, but I don't, but I believe that that has been done.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I've spoken to all of the comments that were made at the public hearing, unless council has any follow-up questions for me. Thank you.
Thank you. And so at this point, what are the wishes of council?
Mr. Chair, I could put the motion on the floor.
Okay, that would be great.
So I would move that the Northwest Community Council, 1, approve the proposed amending development agreement, which shall be substantially the same form as set out in attachment A of the staff report dated June 28th, 2021. And 2, require the amending development agreement be signed by the property owner within 240 days or any extension thereof granted by council on request of the property owner from the date of final approval by council and any other bodies as necessary, including applicable appeal periods, whichever is later. Otherwise, this approval will be void and obligations arising hereunder shall be at an end. So move.
Second.
Thank you, Councillor Blackburn, for that. Councillor Daigle Gammon, go ahead.
I thank very much, Peter, for doing such a really good presentation for us, and Mr. Nelson for being available to answer any questions. I appreciate that very much, as well to Stephanie Appleby Jones and to Mr. Tobin, who also gave us some really good information to make sure that whatever decision is made tonight, that we're understanding what the implications are to residents, to our environment, and to the community. It's really important for everybody's safety, the safety of our lake, our environment, our pedestrians and traffic, all those kinds of things. Mr. Nelson said that there is and he's accurate, that there is a lot of people looking to downsize in our community that are looking to stay in the community and want to have a nice place to live. And again, also a safe place to live. And what I really liked hearing from him was the fact that they also aren't the biggest fans of motorized craft on the lake. So maybe we can do something about that. And also to make sure that we look to see what's happening with the Department of Environment around those permits, so that whatever does get built, it's built according to a standard that is going to keep everybody sort of our environment and all those kinds of things that are important to us. So yeah, I would support this this extension of the application. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Daigle Gammon. We have just seen a note from Councillor Lovelace that she was kicked out. Councillor Lovelace, do you mind if I ask when that happened? And I guess Roxanne, does that have an impact on her ability to vote?
Can I have the response to the answer as to when she last lost contact?
Absolutely. Councillor Lovelace? Your audio is not coming in at all. No, we cannot hear you.
Mr.
No, we still cannot hear you.
Apologies, I keep getting kicked out. I'm not sure why.
Okay. Thank you. Did you hear all of the public meeting?
was just kicked out briefly and asked to update my Zoom when Councillor Diggle Gammon was putting the motion on the floor. So anyway, I said, I have not updated Zoom, but it seems to be a little unstable for some reason. But no, I was here for the entire public hearing. Thank you.
The councillor's fine with voting then, given that she was present for the entire staff presentation and the public hearing?
Okay, thank you very much, Roxanne. So Councillor Diggle Gammon, we have heard from you. If anybody else has any comments, please, including Deputy Mayor or Councillor Lovelace, feel free to enter them into the chat. And not seeing any, I'm going to call for the vote. So all in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. Great, that motion passes. Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is 10.2 variance appeal hearings, and there is none. The next item is correspondence, petitions, and presentations. So over to the clerk. Do we have any correspondence?
Chair Russell, we had correspondence for item 10.1.1, the public hearing that just happened, and that was the only item that we received correspondence from. And as previously noted, it was circulated to the Northwest Community Council.
Okay, thank you very much. And are there any petitions from the clerk's office or from members of council?
The clerk's office did not receive any petitions.
Okay, thank you. And not seeing any from members of council, and there are no presentations. There are no information items brought forward. So the next item on the agenda is 13.1.1, case 21639 Murchison Drive Master Plan. And we have a presentation from Shane Vipond. Shane, the floor is yours.
Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll preface the presentation. First, I'll share the screen by saying that this is about the approval of a subcommittee for the Murchison Drive Master Plan. And what we'll do today in the presentation is provide a brief overview of the master plan and then speak a little in depth about what a public participation committee is and contrast that with the Northwest Planning Advisory Committee or a Planning Advisory Committee. So we'll get into the presentation now. As I just said, at the end of this, we'll be looking for a recommendation to create the PPC for phases 2 and 3. So the master plan, Murchison Drive Master Plan study area is located at the intersection of Highway 111 and Murchison Drive. It's the interchange lands around there. This is within an urban local growth center as identified through the regional plan. And basically that was the enabling policy that permitted council to initiate the planning process. It's an area identified for growth. The master plan itself is divided into 3 phases. The first phase, being in the blue, labeled 7 here, is a review of the growth management policies that currently apply to McCabe Lake North, otherwise known as Indigo Shores. Phase 2 is the review of lands intended to occupy the Cobequid Cultural Society's Cultural Center, plus an HRM Park and Ride and potentially fire station, although those discussions are preliminary at that time. And then the final phase is the rest of the master plan, land uses that are intended to service the growth area, if you will, a couple of commercial quadrants, some mixed uses on one of the quadrants, some seniors housing, residential uses, some parks and open space. And all of this is done in a coordinated fashion. That's what master planning is. So it looks at all of these elements, such as road connections and water servicing, and ensures that all the synergies are considered. All of the land uses relate to each other. How do pedestrians move about? What services will be available to them? In addition, what priority plans need to be considered, such as the integrated mobility plan or the green network plan. And underlying this process is the 2011 community vision, which provides a basis or a framework for the land uses that are considered and thought to be appropriate by the community. So that was a long-running community vision. Just want to note that council initiated this process back in 2018, December 4th, 2018. So it's been ongoing for some time, although it was in advance for a number of years. It started in earnest last fall and again, and we're at near the end of phase 1. Currently, Northwest PAC is dealing with that phase of the project. So the master planning process is required to have a fairly strong public participation component. And within that, when you're dealing with something such as a secondary planning strategy or a master plan or a municipal planning strategy review, these are higher policy documents. You typically have a PPC or a public participation committee that is the liaison to the community, and they're responsible for the public engagement, for the consultation with the stakeholders, or bring forward technical studies. And the reason that is done is because they need to understand why the decisions are being made, the way they're being made, what the constraints are, and why things end up as they do when ultimately the development comes to fruition and the recommendations ultimately are made because of the nuances of the various aspects of development. So ultimately, they will look at detailed design. They'll review the new draft regs, or at least the spirit of them, without getting into the weeds or the jargon of it. And ultimately, they would make a recommendation to the Planning Advisory Committee, who in turn would recommend to Community Council, and ultimately on to Regional Council for final decision. This being a policy matter, it is Regional Council's final decision, but every level of council and advisory committee is involved in the process to some extent. So in the chart, this is identified as an area advisory committee, otherwise known as a public participation committee. So it's enabled through the Halifax Charter. It's not unlike the Planning Advisory Committee in the sense that it makes recommendations to council on matters of land use policy and regulation. Again, as I mentioned before, it acts as that liaison to the public. It provides input into the advisory process. And it's usually, as I mentioned, maybe, I'll just phrase it another way, it's usually utilized for larger land use project work, as opposed to the PAC, which looks at a lot of items and deals with that. And I'll discuss that in the next slide. But to be clear, a PPC, or Public Participation Committee, is utilized in every municipal planning strategy, in the creation of every one of those documents, be it a municipal planning strategy, secondary planning strategy, or a master plan. There is always a public participation component to that process to ensure that it is a democratic process, essentially. So they operate on the terms of reference, make decisions on key points. They consult the community, as I mentioned, and they make recommendations to the Community Council to recommend further to regional. So what are the distinctions between PAC and a PPC? It's a matter of breadth and depth, I think. If you look at a Planning Advisory Committee, they consider a wide array of projects. Under a general review, they move through many projects, and they make recommendations at the end of any given application that comes before them. On the PPC side, it's typically a single project-based mandate where they study issues in depth, and they study them until resolution. And sometimes it can take multiple meetings to resolve an issue if it's complex. And then they make recommendations to council on the at the end of each identified deliverable, whether that be at the end of the project or at certain milestones In this case, we have 3 phases. We intend to bring forward a recommendation at the end of each phase in order to make it a manageable process. So that's the distinction between the Planning Advisory Committee and the PPC. They've been used widely in the past and likely will continue to be going into the future. So that's the point of this meeting today, is to get to offer a recommendation to Northwest Community Council to create a public participation committee for this case, which shall be substantially similar per the revised terms of reference as circulated in September 19th, 2021 meeting of Northwest Community Council. I am available for questions necessary.
Okay. Thank you very much, Shane. Councillor Blackburn, would you be interested in putting the motion on the floor?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, sir. I move that Northwest Community Council create a public participation committee for case 21639, which shall be substantially similar per the revised terms of reference as circulated at the September 13th, 2021 meeting of the Northwest Community Council. I so move.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Outthut, Deputy Mayor. Good stuff. Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Blackburn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question for Shane. Thank you so much for this. I find I'm learning more every time I see the presentation, so I really appreciate this. I'm just wondering about the complement of the committee. Roughly, how many members do they have to come from a certain geographical area? I'm just wondering how that all shakes down, because this is such a specific project and is concerning such a specific area. Just wondering how that works. Thank you.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. So the first step in that process is to determine if any of the persons on the Northwest PAC wish to sit on the committee. We're seeking a total of 8 members. So we'll elicit their or at least try to understand if they wish to participate given the time commitment, because it can be substantial. And depending upon that outcome, then we'll go to the committee. It's not geographically based, although I think we would probably apply with the intention that we would hope people that are within the relative location of this particular development would show more interest than others. But at this point, I guess we'll see what we have available to us. We know that the contingent of volunteers in the community, it's very strong, but it has been saturated at some points. So we're very hopeful that we'll have 8 people strong and willing. That being said, we'll only know when we get there. So.
All right. No, thank you for the clarification. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor Blackburn. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. And just very quickly, we recently appointed some folks to the equivalent of a PPE in Port Wallace. And I believe that in that, we actually said they had to be from District 1 or District 6. Councillor Gammon will be able to confirm me. So I'm just wondering, Shane, and PAC, of course, is largely geographic. I'm just wondering if we should really make an effort or even make it a criteria for first round that I think it probably should be people from the area. So I just wanted your thoughts on that based on, I've been involved only with a couple of PPEs in the past, and they certainly were people in the local area. And of course, as I said, what we just did for Port Wallace. So just your thoughts on that, Shane.
I certainly don't have any trouble with identifying those areas in advance. If council feels comfortable with that, and if council wishes to make an amendment to the motion to ensure that participants come from those particular districts within the master plan area, certainly staff will comply with that direction.
Okay, I'll throw that over to Councillor Blackburn to see what she thinks, but that would kind of be my preference, but not necessarily the hill I would die on, but just we'll hear what she has to say. Thank you, Shane.
Okay, thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. Again, if anyone has any questions for Shane or to put on the floor, then I welcome them in the chat. Councillor Blackburn, a second time, go ahead.
Sorry, I'll wait and see if there's any other members of committee that wanted to, since I've already spoken, but
Okay, I'm going to take just a couple of minutes just to speak for a second about the participation in the committee. If this is limited to a geographic area for members of this committee, then I would appreciate District 15 being considered as well, because anything that happens at the Murchison exit with respect to a park and ride would affect Lower Sackville as well, because it would offload some of the traffic that is coming down to the Sackville bus terminal. And so it would have a direct impact on what we do. So if there is consideration, I would simply ask the committee to include Lower Sackville. Thank you. And I don't see anybody else, so
Just quickly, sorry, keeping in mind what we did with Port Wallace, which I think had to be, half had to be from 1 and half had to be from 6, I believe. I would certainly, if Councillor Blackburn is interested in the amendment, I would think that it would make sense that they come from districts 15 and 16. My 2 cents, or at least the Northwest Community Council area, but perhaps 14 and 15. But anyway, we'll see what Councillor Blackburn has to say.
thank you. Councillor Blackburn, go ahead.
thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Yes, that's what I had jotted down. I was thinking perhaps of putting forth an amendment that the composition of the committee, the Public Participation Committee, include residents of districts 14 and 15. I'm not so much hung up on the 50-50 split like Port Wallace. That one seems to warrant a 50-50 split of membership, but for this one, I would like to see some representation from the Lower Sackville area included on this. So I'd like to move an amendment that the composition of the committee include residents includes residents of districts 14 and 15.
Is limited to residents?
Limited to residents of districts 14, although I'm thinking 13 might because of the component there with the fire station. So perhaps I'll amend that to include districts 13, 14, and 15.
Second, Tim.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillors Blackburn and Outfit.
Mr. Chair, may I?
Absolutely.
So the way that the terms of reference are drafted, we first look to the Northwest Planning Advisory Committee to see if there is any willingness in terms of participation. Some of the members of Northwest Planning Advisory Committee do not fall within those districts. So I just want to be sure that everyone understands that what the amendment is trying to achieve. Is the amendment seeking to achieve that only those members that are within certain districts that currently sit on the Northwest Planning Advisory Committee are eligible to participate, or is it after we've looked to participation through Northwest PAC that the membership should then only follow to those districts? And I only offer that as a point of clarification.
No, good. That's a good point. Thank you. I would say after any spots that are left after Northwest PAC, certainly because I think it's important, no matter where their geographical house is, the volunteers that already serve on the Planning Advisory Committee certainly have some valuable experience that could be mined for this Public Participation Committee. So I'm not sure how to wordsmith that, and maybe Roxanne or Andrea can help me with it. But after the Northwest Planning Advisory is asked and members gathered from that, any remaining members of the public that need to be recruited should come from districts 13, 14, and 15.
I agree with that as seconder. Yep.
Thank you very much, Councillor Blackburn and Deputy Mayor. Thea, would you like to add anything to that? I see your camera on.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think actually the way that it was summarized by Councillor Blackburn probably addressed the point I wanted to make. I just wanted to make sure that we didn't provide like a mathematical calculation that needed to be balanced with the remaining numbers. If we have 6 members of PAC interested and we only have 2 spots to fill, if we do a 50-50 split, that could create some challenges. So I just wanted to make sure we weren't going down that path, and it sounds like we're not. So I think we're fine. Thank you.
Okay, super. Thank you very much. Andrea or Roxanne, I'm wondering if you have had the opportunity to craft the text.
Yes, Chair Russell, I'm just about to put it into the chat.
Perfect.
And I'll read it out as well.
Thank you.
I have that the selection of members for the Public Participation Committee after selection from the members of the Northwest PAC. I will reword this. It's kind of awkward now. That the selection of members from the Public Participation Committee after the selection from the members of the Northwest PAC to the committee be limited to residents from districts 13, 14, and 15.
Councillor Blackburn, a note that, okay, thank you very much.
Question?
Is there any, the question has been called. I don't see any further discussion. So all those in favor of, is this a friendly amendment? I believe it is.
Oh.
Roxanne, is this a friendly amendment, or do we need to vote on this amendment and then vote on the main motion?
The motion's from staff, not from one of us, so I don't think it can be friendly.
Fair point. So all those in favor of this amendment, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say nay. Great, thank you. Any further discussion on the amended motion? Not seeing any. All those in favor of the amended motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say nay. Great, thank you. That motion passes. Thank you very much for that. The next item on the agenda is item 13.2.1, and this is Councillor Lovelace. We had originally received one motion in the agenda, but on the advice of the solicitor, this is being broken into 2 motions. And Councillor Lovelace, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I will apologize for having an unstable internet connection. So I'm very sorry about that. I'm not going to turn on my video because chances are I will just disappear. Something bizarre happening with Bell right now. So I will put this motion, the first motion, on the floor. And before I do that, I want to thank staff for recognizing, the need to adjust this motion and break it out into 2. So thank you so much for that. I move that Northwest Community Council recommend that Regional Council request a staff report on the intersection of Hammonds Plains and Lucasville roads to include 1, recommendations to upgrade the intersection to ease the congestion of both westbound and eastbound traffic, 2, appropriately plan for transit in this intersection, and 3, increase pedestrian safety in this intersection. I so move.
Thank you very much,
Second.
Councillor Lovelace. Seconded by Councillor Blackburn. Thank you. Do you have anything to add to that, Councillor Lovelace?
Yes, I will be very brief. I know everyone on this community council is well aware of the challenges on Hammonds Plains Road. In particular, my next door neighbor, Councillor Blackburn, is well aware of the intersection challenges here. The last upgrade, significant upgrade that took place was in 2012. And that was when Hammonds Plains Road was widened, the shoulders were paved. There was some changes to the Lucasville-Hammonds Plains intersection. But at this point, if Halifax Transit wanted to get a bus to turn onto the Lucasville Road and off the Lucasville Road, it would be extremely challenging. Now that the water main has been extended, I think this is a great opportunity to look at what changes we can make to ensure that
the eastbound traffic that is traveling into Bedford. Those folks that are turning left on Lucasville are not actually holding up the traffic. Unfortunately, there are so many folks that are going to Sackville that are headed to Highway 101 and taking that Lucasville roadway that the traffic at times is backed up from Lucasville all the way past Pockwalk Road because of that left turning traffic. So, you know, I've watched people try to get to the bus stop crossing Lucasville Road. And I would also like to mention that this is the intersection that the former councillor for District 13 was hit. We know that there have been numbers, so I look forward to your support. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor Lovelace. Councillor Outhick, go ahead.
Absolutely pleased to support this without hesitation. My only suggestion was appropriately planned for transit in this intersection. I would have considered saying plan for, or, you know, ensure there's transit in this location, or plan for transit. You know, they only worry with things like appropriate or something, then come back and say, well, it isn't appropriate for here, or it isn't appropriate because of that. But perhaps the councillor has had those discussions. But if she was comfortable, I would have probably even toughened up number 2 a little bit, but that's up to her. She's not one to shy away. So thank you, Chair. Can't hear you, Paul. You're muted.
Yes, I saw that. Thank you very much for that as well. Councillor Lovelace, would you be interested in amending that, or are you happy with the text of the motion as it has been pasted in the chat?
Thank you. The reason I said appropriately planned was because that intersection very well could become a great place to have more transit, a larger bus shelter. So I did say appropriately planned because I think we do need to think about where we're going the next 10 years. But to the Deputy Mayor, I absolutely take your point. And just saying plan for transit in this intersection is fine for me. So I'm willing to hear what the other councillors say if they feel that just, you know, planning is what we need to do. I'm happy to amend that.
I like it.
I'm sure you do. Councillor Daigle-Gammon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I actually like the word appropriately planned for transit because maybe then we can start talking about what are really good standards for how we plan for transit. So I'm kind of intrigued by how they'll respond to that, actually, Councillor Lovelace. So I'm really good with leaving appropriate.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
Who asked you?
Okay, thank you. So we have some uncertainty about the word appropriately, which is Councillor Lovelace, I'm looking to you for direction. Would you?
I think that Councillor Daigle-Gammon and I are on the exact same page because when we think about appropriately, we're looking at not only the standards that we have today, but where the future needs to be. This intersection, this roadway has been just neglected overall from a planning perspective. And so, you know, in thinking about the future of Halifax Transit in Hammonds Plains and Lucasville, you know, I know that Councillor Blackburn and I are really excited about getting some transit here for both of our districts and our communities that desperately need it. So no offense, Deputy Mayor, but I'm going to leave appropriately.
I'll appropriately agree then.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. So we have the motion on the floor, and I don't see any further comments. So all those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. Great, thank you. That motion passes. Councillor Lovelace, your second motion, please.
Well, thank you so much, colleagues. So moving along, we took this this item off of the previous motion because it is quite substantial. So I move that Northwest Community Council request a staff report on lifting the restrictions in Schedule J of the Hammonds Plains, Beaver Bank, and Upper Sackville land use bylaw entitled Beaver Bank Hammonds Plains Growth Control Area to permit new connector roads off Hammonds Plains.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lovelace. Do we have a seconder for that second motion?
Second?
Councillor Blackburn, thank you. Councillor Lovelace, go ahead. And keep in mind that your audio is a little bit unstable, so thank you for leaving your video off for right now.
Oh, thank you. I'm so sorry about being so unstable tonight. So I know that we've talked about this many times, a planning advisory committee, at Northwest Community Council, at various different development agreement discussions. This Schedule J, while maybe had some good meaning when it was put in place to kind of control the growth, at the end of the day, it has created more issues by intentionally directing the traffic onto the main corridor. And so Hammonds Plains Road, and instead of having a better grid system, has actually received more direct traffic onto that road. So I would like to have staff consider, removing the restrictions in Schedule J to permit new connector roads that give us the opportunity to reduce that traffic congestion on the Hammonds Plains Road. And I look forward to the discussion. I know that this, it had good meaning when it was put in place, but I think at this point it's clear that it is stifling, affordable housing growth, but it's also, creating far more congestion by forcing all the
It sounds like we just lost you, but I think we got everything that you were saying.
Oh, sorry, I'm here.
Yep. Okay. Super. Super.
Yeah. So in any way, I hope that you support this. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any further comments? Is there any further discussion on this motion?
Just quickly, Mr. Chair, it's Tim.
Go ahead.
I'll absolutely support this. My only concern is, and again, Councillor Lovelace, knowing her's probably done all her due diligence, but what you want to make sure when you take off these restrictions, that it could be a bit of a double-edged sword in the sense that she wants the restrictions taken off to have these other access roads, which I completely support. But I hope that because we have a housing shortage, removing these restrictions could lead to growth in the area, which if it's prepared for is a good thing. But as we've known in West Bedford and other areas, and we're trying to learn from, and for Murchison and for Port Wallace, we have to make sure that the infrastructure comes a little sooner, or indeed maybe sometimes before the growth. So just wondering, she may have been all through this with staff, but what I would hate to see is that there weren't some triggers that this would have to happen prior to suddenly whole new subdivisions popping up for additional expansion, this sort of thing. And she's probably all over this, but my only concern is that let's just make sure that the infrastructure gets in place.
Yeah.
First.
No, that I appreciate that, Deputy Mayor. And I think what's really important here is the timing of this and the review with the regional plan. I think having both of these considerations taking place at the same time is beneficial, so that we can more appropriately plan for this area. We're at a point right now where we've lost the potential for seniors housing because of Schedule J. And, I think that while we need to consider the supports that the infrastructure on Hammonds Plains Road needs, desperately needs, we also at the same time have to balance with the fact that we need these connector roads connecting the neighborhoods And some of those connector roads are going to come off of Hammonds Plains Road. And so, as we consider ways to permit these new connector roads, what we're seeing is that Schedule J is not the tool that's actually working in our best interest.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Outfit, that satisfies your concerns?
Thumbs up.
And your audio is horrible. Okay.
Sorry, I had my it doesn't seem to like camera and sound on at the same time. So all I said was 100% support, thumbs up. Yep.
Okay, thank you very much. And I don't see any further comments in the chat. So all those in favor of this motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say nay. Great, that motion passes. Thank you very much, everybody. The next item on the agenda is motions, and there are none. Then there is no in-camera segment. There are no added items. Notices of motion. And I don't see any. There is a public participation section listed next, and that is on the that has already happened with respect to one motion, but there were also no members of the public who signed up to speak by the deadline, which was 4:30 p.m. on the day before this meeting. So the date of the next meeting on the website, it indicates it's September 13th, which is a little bit in error. The date of the next meeting of the Northwest Community Council is October 4th, 2021. I'm not sure if we will be in person or virtual. That remains to be determined, as we are moving back to an in-person format in some areas. Andrea, are you able to provide any advice on that?
Yes, Chair Russell. Sorry.
I said whichever is appropriate at the time. I like that appropriate word tonight. I'm trying to throw it in a few times.
So Chair Russell, it's something that we can discuss at our agenda review for the October meeting.
Okay, super. Thank you very much. And in that case, the next item on the the date of the next meeting is October 4th, 2021. And so the next item on the agenda is the adjournment. So would someone be interested in moving the adjournment?
Move adjourned. Good night, all.
Thank you very much,
Beautiful.
Deputy Mayor. Thank you.